we're going to be talking about traditional Andean music. And I'm going to go kind of fast through all of this just because there's a lot of information that we have to go through if I want to fit it all in 10 minutes. So, Andean music is primarily from the areas that the Inca Empire had been. So this would include modern parts of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru. But it also follows the mountain line of the Andes themselves. And some important background to think about, especially when we're looking at something as important as music is to culture, is that conquistadors began colonizing in 1532, but were not completely successful until 1572, which is about, 40 years? That's a long time for colonization to be happening. And then, of course, like any other forms of control, music was a way to be used as control. It was erased and it was taken away. And so because of that, a lot of the traditional music from the Incas were lost. We still have a few, and they're primarily, I think I mentioned later on in the project as well, that they're primarily instrumental. A lot of the vocal pieces were lost. So looking at musical traits, again, I kind of broke this down into before colonization and after colonization because music changed so drastically after the arrival of colonizers, either by force or the gradual mixing of traditions. So before colonization, music was often played in smaller chamber groups. Usually it would only have about 2 to 5 performers, unless it was a traveling piece or like a religious piece. So again, depending on how many flutes would be in the group, you would have 2 to 5 parallel octaves, and there would be parallel fifths or fourths sometimes between the lowest or the bass flute and the highest or the soprano flute. They would also be tuned diatonically and only be played pentatonically. So like it says here, and I'll go into it a little bit more detail, but the traditional instruments we have are the putoto, quina, antara, and then several other types of percussion instruments. So the putotos were conch shells, and they were often used to signal like across mountains that people were arriving, hence the travel songs, or it would just be blown to communicate between towns. The quinas and antaras were different types of flutes made from bamboo, bone, or clay. Almost everything that has survived or made now is made from bamboo. And then antaras were the oldest and most perfected instruments. So moving on to after colonization, music after colonization kept a lot of the similar core elements. So like the rhythms, melodic elements, but they were now accompanied by lutes, banderillas, vihuelas, guitars, all of those stringed instruments, and then in later years, more classical instruments like trumpets. And then just a general analysis, rhythm, most Andean music, especially the like work songs or dance songs, obviously had a very rhythmic drive. And even if they weren't dance songs specifically, a lot of them had a dance like beat. And then beats were very clearly defined and would be accompanied by percussion or clapping as well. And then, like I had said before, there wasn't a lot of like harmony. It was mostly just parallel octaves. Because tuning got a little wonky, tuning wouldn't be perfect to what we as a Western culture expect it to be. So it would be a little bit different and a little clashy. And it's mostly a monophonic texture as well. Oh, yes, and the replication of nature sounds was extremely important in this music. They have instruments made from like bird feathers that are supposed to replicate the sounds of birds, or they have frogs that like little frog carvings that actually replicate the sounds of frogs. Yeah, it was really important for them. And then moving on to the importance of music, is that many aspects of Incan culture are based around the patterns in the world around them. So their city would be in the position with the stars and the sun, and their music was no different. It was in time with their calendar. Music during different times would be built around different scales and different instrumentation, and you could only talk about songs for the harvest during the harvest, and things like that. There's a few more specific ideas, but I wasn't able to find all of them, unfortunately. And generally the times can be broken into two sections, which were the dry season and the wet season. So yeah, Incas had the most like refined music in the Americas, but they didn't have a writing system, so it made writing down music extremely hard and passing on music extremely hard. That's why a lot of the music was actually lost. And what I thought was really interesting is that they also had a school for music, but unfortunately with the colonizers, it kind of got destroyed. But students would be selected on musical talent, and women were also allowed to be students. It was just a little bit more, beauty standards. And then they also had a song cycle almost that would go on for like 3 to 4 hours without stopping. They would be dancing the whole time. And it was essentially formatted similar to Melionas, which are Hawaiian name songs, which talk about the importance of chiefs and the importance of people history in the tribe. So I wanted to do a few closing thoughts on Andean music and musicology, just because it was really important. I feel like to say this is that very little information on Andean culture and Andean music is written by Andean people. And a lot of the time, sources would either fetishize or inferiorize the culture, and it made finding sources that weren't racist very hard. And I think because we obsess over what is academic and what is not, we start to exclude others from conversations, even when they're the ones that this is about. And while it's important to use privilege to talk about it and support others, we can't talk over them. We have to let their voices be heard first. And unfortunately, a lot of that isn't happening with Andean music. It's especially any peer-reviewed sources, a lot of it is not great. But in the past 10-15 years, there's been a resurgence of Andean music and the revival of the culture and the language that was in those sections. So I'm hoping that we get a little bit more musicology that isn't based in purely Western thought. But yeah,